All right, back for a second appearance here on 3 Point Podcast, the great voice of Michigan Wolverines basketball on the radio, Brian Bush. And Brian, again, that moment when they took home the national championship, just relay some of your thoughts.
Yeah, Ted, appreciate you and the rest of the guys for having me. For me, it was overwhelming. It was emotional. Obviously, when you have a moment like that, that had been built up for the program for decades, where Michigan had gotten so close, you think about a lot of people. For me, it was obviously working with Terry Mills,
Mhm.
who this season meant so much to him. Also, the other two members of our crew who don't get nearly as much shine, Tony Butler, our engineer, Rob Joyce, our host, getting a chance to build that camaraderie, that culture with them and have it culminate in a championship is really special because when you're in this industry, just getting a chance to work with a crew like that at a school like Michigan, that in and of itself, we could go 500 every year and it would still be a pleasure and a joy. But Terry has been so impactful for me as I've grown into this role as somebody who has been a skeleton key for me in introducing me to former players, in helping me get to know some of the aspects of the program that you can only really learn when you're embedded in it. So, to see him experience that as somebody who talked about regularly the fact that, this season allowed him to reminisce, to remember some of the things he experienced with Glenn, Mark, Ramil, all the rest of those great 89 players. Because when you're in it, it's tough to truly embrace it and soak it all in because it's about what's next practice, next lift,
Right.
next game, next road trip, whatever it might be. So for him to regularly, I mean, this was back in November. We're at the players era, and it's easy to start thinking about, the biggest prizes in college basketball when you're winning by 40, 30, and 40.
Right.
But for him to say multiple times that this group reminded him of 89 and allowed him to think back to some of those memories that just had to be pushed aside because you're focused on what's next, because you want to maximize the opportunity, the situation. That for me was the coolest part, and it was a big reason why I was so intentional about uh, making sure to have Terry and the 89 team as part of the final call because I want that group and this group to be tied together beyond just the center banners that are hung at Chrysler. And hopefully those two aren't alone very long like the 89 one was for 37 years. But, you know, I- the fact that Terry is a connection between the two, for him to
Yeah.
be a player on one and a broadcaster on the other. I mean, that is such a unique and incredible opportunity that we as fans get as a Michigan basketball family. And for him to experience it and put the work in and put the passion in that he does, it's really tough to top that interaction and what I got to see with him in the moments after the buzzer sounded.
No, you guys are a great crew, and Terry Mills, obviously a Michigan legend, a Detroit Pistons legend, had a long NBA career. I mean, he's a legitimate career in basketball, and now carrying it on, calling the basketball games with you. It's a really cool story, and I'm not sure if outside of maybe the Big Ten, outside of definitely Michigan fans, maybe a lot of people didn't know that connection. I think a lot of people even forgot about Glenn Rice and the historic
Jeez.
run that he went on for that tournament. So really, that it was cool to bring some of those 89 memories back. I am curious though, Terry Mills, we saw the Fab Five alternate broadcast where Jalen Rose and Yaxel and Chris Webber, they were talking about, will this team be the best Michigan team ever? Obviously bringing in the 89 team also, but they're talking about the Fab Five. Did Terry ever tell you off the record or on the record his honest thoughts on if this team with Yaxel and those guys are better than the 89 team?
Yeah, Matt. I mean, he answered it a few times on the record, and obviously he thinks that he and the '89 team, if all things were equal, most importantly, age, bone structure,
Yeah.
health,
Right.
if all of that were equal, of course, him and Glenn and Mark would think, yeah, we'll beat we'll beat their, what, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just competitors like that. What I've tried to say, and it was interesting in some of the conversations I had with various outlets leading up to and in the aftermath of the national championship, of how several times people would think that the Fab Five won the national championship.
Right.
Right.
And I think most Michigan fans realize it. What I would say about this is I do, just because athletes evolve and I don't know what any team, I don't know what the 2018 team would do with a Yax, Merez, Adai front court. Like that's just a really unique assignment. But what I would say is that I think the 2026 team is the best team in Michigan basketball history. Just like if Michigan wins title in like 8 years, I think that team will be the best team in Michigan basketball history. I think the 89 team is the best story in Michigan basketball history to do what they did with Steve Fisher taking over, where literally everybody knew going in the only way Steve Fisher was going to be the head coach permanently was if he won the national championship.
Right.
And then, the Fab Five, those are the most impactful culturally and in basketball, the most impactful teams in Michigan basketball history. They all have their special place, and they all have very, deep meaning, not just for Michigan, but for the Big Ten, for college basketball. But yeah, in this debate culture, you want to figure it out. I'm always going to lean toward the younger, more modern team, because let's face it, the game evolves, it gets different. And I don't know what any team this year or otherwise would do with Yax, Merez, and Adai.
Right.
I'm glad you tied in the 89 team to your final call, because I swear the national media, that team didn't exist. It's Fab Five, and then anything before that, I don't think existed in Michigan basketball.
Jared has some thoughts on the Fab Five, by the
way. They're very exposed lately, it seems like. How long did it take you to think of your final call? Was that something you were thinking about, as that game was winding down last 5 minutes, or is it something you had in your mind maybe for a couple weeks before that?
So the bridge to Terry, where I said, and Terry Mills, you and that 1989 team finally have company. I can say that so smoothly. I probably can't go word for word before that, because I thought of that in like January.
Right.
And it was for a couple of reasons. One, it was because I wanted to attach the 89 team and that first national championship to the second, if we were fortunate enough to get to that point. And also just logistically, in that moment, with so much emotion, I wanted to make sure Terry knew exactly when I wanted him to start talking. I didn't want to script it with him beforehand. I didn't want to discuss it with him. I remember when we were calling the Elite Eight game, and like that thing was done probably late first half.
Right.
But I'm talking in the middle of the second half when it's at 30, and I'm basically saying, hey, Michigan's going to the Final Four. And Terry was giving me some flack in the breaks at like the under 8 media timeout. And I'm like, come on. Like, I get it. I understand. I said, but this thing's done. Like, it's over. Right. So he finally started to relent when we got to like 3 minutes left. So I didn't want to have any sort of worry about having the discussion beforehand. I did want to make sure that he knew exactly when he was going to come in, because logistically, once I finish that call, I take off, in essence, this headset, and I put on a pair of headphones and a wireless microphone and put a couple of things in my pocket. And then I walk and go onto the court. So I also needed to make sure he knew when to talk, so that I could basically go from play-by-play guy to on-court reporter. So logistically, it was a unique, setup as well, and it worked out really well. And that to me, those 40 minutes are as proud of anything I've ever done professionally, because of all the emotion and all that we did. We were documenting history at that point, which was really, really cool. And you can catch that on our Defend the Block podcast. Like I've compared and talked about the last call into the Will and Namari interviews as like, those are deathbed memories. I will remember that until the day I die, because of what that meant, because of what in particular Will and Namari meant, not just to the program, not just to that team, but to me individually. So the fact that those were the first two players I got to talk to, just based on, it wasn't organized. It's chaos when you get to that point. It's the best kind of chaos. So that was really special. The rest of the call, I'd kind of thought about a little bit here and there, but wanted it to come to me naturally. And I never expected there to be a 90-foot pass to end the game, which was awesome. Right. That was one of the most shrewd passes I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, there's some different components there, but the very end, I think I honestly thought about it the week of the Wisconsin game, and then I felt like an idiot. I was like, well, why did I jinx that? Like, this is how it goes. I guess I broadcaster jinxed it. But the other aspects, you try to make it, you don't want it to be scripted all the way. And I'm glad that we had a play where it was so unique and different that we had to do some describing. It wasn't just dribbling out the clock. It was a real life situation that went down to the wire. And now looking back, as stressful as that title game was, I'm glad it was stressful. I'm glad it was close, because that makes some of the key plays, in particular the Trey McKinney 3, that much more special.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, not taking anything away from your talent, but man, the game makes the broadcast. I would 100% agree with that. Little bit of inside basketball. I've been a play-by-play guy at local high school level for over 40 years, but when you get ready for a game, especially a national championship game, do you give it that little extra on your spotter board? You make sure you have as many facts as you can spit out where you can fit it in, because I'm sure, like me, you're over prepared and maybe you use 60% of what you write down as far as homework. Walk us through that process, because everybody knows when the game's going on, you're describing things, but you're also throwing in nuggets that you've done in your homework.
Yeah, Ted, it was unique, especially with the quick turnaround. Now, I had done some prep on both UConn and Illinois, which was the easy one. Honestly, I was just, from a selfish standpoint, I was kind of hoping UConn would win over Illinois for two reasons. One, I knew that Michigan would be able to overload Lucas Oil with fans just based on the logistics. Illinois had a ton of fans. And I know they don't like us very much, which, hey, that's how it goes. But I have a lot of respect for their fans and how they filled that place. They had a built-in advantage of being the first team to clinch, but that place was loaded with orange on Saturday night. But the other aspect was I kind of wanted a different prep and something unique. And, for me, when you get to that point, and you're, it's late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and you're just digging in after finishing all that you have to do post Arizona, there was more information during those 2 days than I could take in. Normally I'm able to take in a lot of it, but I mean, there were legitimately, multiple hours of press conferences, tons of guys available. So I really, for one of the few times in my career, had to discern what I wanted to digest before Monday night. Right. And, it was unique because it was such a quick turnaround. And there were already so many built-in storylines, the Terrace Reed connection, the fact that it's one of the best seasons ever versus the best dynasty in college basketball. Like, the winner of that game would have locked in one of those two things. And unfortunately, it was Michigan. So for me, I basically just read as much as I can in game notes, articles. I go through each player's stats and try to pick up trends. And I just have basically a Microsoft program that I use for every single game called OneNote, where I just write down as much as I can on that. And I organize it by team and player and coach or whatever. And the last thing that I do is put it onto my board, which is in an Excel document, which I convert to a PDF and print it out. So for me, it's really, I'm probably putting on my chart in that setting, probably 35-40% of what I wrote down onto the chart. And then of that, I might use 25 to 30%. So it's very different in terms of the amount of information you have, because you've got all of college basketball's best writers. You've got all of Michigan's beat, which has some tremendous reporters and writers and analysts. So there was only so much I could digest. I had a lot more time, obviously, between Tennessee and Arizona, because it was a 6-day gap.
Right.
But for me, it was really just trusting what I did and being able to immerse myself within the program and watch a few film sessions and talk to a few players and stuff along those lines. So it was a fun challenge, because it was one of the few times in my career where I didn't have as much time to read everything and digest everything as I wanted to. It kind of took me back to my minor league baseball days, where we played till 11 o'clock on Tuesday and we played 11 a.m. Wednesday. So just get 4 hours of sleep, come back, prep a little bit, and get it ready to go.
Turn mic on.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you can, like you said, there's so much information. You could almost it's almost like to a detriment. Like, you could read too much, where like now you don't even have your thoughts gathered because you've read so much. And then like the game, but it is good to be prepped, because I know Ted's talked to us about it, and you're well aware, like those blowouts, that's when you need those notes. Right. That's when you're like, man, we need something to talk about. We can't just sit here and BS for the next 2 hours in a 30-point blowout. So it is good to be prepared. You brought up Terrace Reed. He's had a really good college career. I'll be curious to see how he translates to the pros, but it's crazy to see. So he started at Michigan, transferred to UConn. UConn's obviously won a couple national titles, and then now Michigan, but he has not been on any of the teams, either UConn or Michigan, that have won a title. Just kind of crazy how that's played out. But I wanted to ask you about, in a sense, like the state of college basketball. We talked about at the beginning of the season how like nowadays whether it's football or basketball, more basketball teams, we have to learn a new roster every year as fans. I mean, we have to, it takes 2 weeks, maybe a couple months to really know your team. If it's a team like Michigan, you know, some teams don't hit the portal as hard as teams like Michigan, but I'm curious your thoughts on like all of that as a broadcaster and then even just as a fan, because I saw like Dusty May was on, he was on like, you know, Pat McAfee, and he was on some other shows the day after talking about already hitting the portal, talking about already like making calls and trying to call recruits and stuff. And it's like, this is the day after you just won a national title. Can you just kind of give some thoughts on that? Like, again, as a broadcaster and fan, like you're having to learn a new roster every year and the transfer portal. And it's just the state of college basketball is wild.
Well, Matt, this is better than what it was the previous year, where the portal opened the Monday of the Sweet 16 Elite 8 prep week.
Oh, right.
So, you know, I remember as disappointing as it is for this staff, and also, I mean, listen, the worst of it is the UConn staff to get to the national championship and then lose and have to immediately dig into the portal. Like that's the worst case scenario. And I'm sure you guys read them, or at least heard of the Matt Norlander piece about Dusty being embedded with Dusty during some of the some of the portal recruiting here over the last week.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's really it's a bummer how it works, but legitimately, last year I'm over at the building on Monday. We're getting ready to cut our radio show for that week. Michigan's traveling Wednesday to Atlanta to take on Auburn after that thrilling win against Texas A&M over the weekend, and they're organizing portal responsibilities. And if you recall, after the loss to Auburn, which was a late night game, I don't think we tipped until after 10 o'clock Eastern. Dusty May is sitting at a coffee shop with Elliot Cadeau at 9 a.m. the next day, getting ready for next year. So the reality is there is no centralized leadership right now in really any aspect of college sports. And you have it largely driven by coaches and their needs at the given time. And there isn't going to be a flawless approach. I just feel bad. Like the thing that stuck with me the most is, I don't know if you guys saw the clips of Dusty on Good Morning America. Like he looked like he was as tired as anyone I've ever seen.
Right.
And truly, like I marvel at Dusty for a lot of reasons. I mean, his ability to delegate, his CEO approach, how he handles those types of situations. He did a 40-minute interview with a guy who was really helpful to me when Dusty got the job, FAU's play-by-play guy, Ken Levica, who does a really nice job for the Owls. And he did a 40-minute interview with Ken the week after, or the week of, like late week of the national championship win. And like, that's such a credit to Dusty for building that, and to Ken for maintaining that relationship. Ken's really good at what he does. But like, he does that for all these different outlets, and he's still recruiting in the portal. And that's because of the trust he has in the staff and all of it. But yes, if you win a national championship, you want to be able to have, there's a reason why they're, in Major League Baseball after the World Series, there's got like 5 days before, team, options have to be picked up, and some of these other aspects. There's a built-in break. In college sports, there just isn't. I don't know when there will be, but it is unfortunate because truly, Dusty, he did not get a chance to appreciate this as much as he deserved to. And not saying that he would have went on a 3-day bender. That's not who he is.
Right.
But he deserved, that team deserved, the staff deserved a chance to soak it in more than they got. And now that is a first world problem when you win a national championship.
Right.
But it's still, there should be some sort of built-in break. And I think that's the case for every sport at every level. There has to be some stretch where you just stop. And right now that doesn't really exist in many facets of college sports.
Last question for me. What was it like seeing, because you've been there obviously for a little bit now, calling games at the Chrysler Center. What was it like kind of seeing it come back to life this year? I mean, even Izzo had to admit it was pretty good for them.
Yeah. That, of all the press conferences, that sure was one of them. Yeah, he, I could say a lot. Anywho, it was really, really fun. For a number of reasons. One, like personally, selfishly, we actually moved downstairs this year for our radio position. So we used to be up top, kind of, off to the side in the bottom of the upper level. So this year we were able to work with some of the staff at Michigan to move us to the second row behind the scorers table.
Nice.
Which my favorite moment of that, just from a comedy standpoint, was getting a chance to experience the Eric Musselman handshake of Dusty May. That was uncomfortable.
Right.
That was pretty great. So it's amazing how much, how well spoken other people were about Dusty in the NCAA tournament. Just didn't happen to the Big Ten. I
Right.
wonder why. So I think what was really fun was just how much the fans got into it, and to see it 2 years ago was one thing, but also to think back to the pandemic year of how much fun that bubble team would have been,
Oh,
where
right.
I think the highest attendance that year was like 130 people because it was just
Right.
friends and family spread out in masks. So the fact that we had a team that, listen, if Isaiah Livers doesn't get hurt, maybe we're talking about this being a third national championship. Maybe we're talking about Juwan Howard still being here, right? Like
Right.
that
Yeah.
could have been a big pivot point in all of this. That team was really, really good. Now, so was Baylor, so was Gonzaga. Nothing's guaranteed. I know the previous year, like 35 teams think they would have won the 2020 national championship.
Michigan
But-
State being one. Yep.
Correct. Yes. And I feel for the likes of like a San Diego State or a Dayton
Right.
or whoever. But I remember hearing, I think it might have been Livers being like, yeah, we really thought we were going to make a run and win it all.
Yep.
Like, listen, I'm all maize and blue, but I think we were going to be a 7 seed. Like, I don't know if we can claim that one.
Right.
But hey, if you go back to some, national championships, I think Alabama's got an 8-4 national championship in like the 1930s. So maybe we can. Who knows?
They have in Auburn, a lot of claimed national titles.
Yeah,
in football.
it's real rich from some of those programs
Right.
to complain about the UCF championship when they were technically number 1 in a poll. I don't know how legitimate the poll was, but they were number 1 in a
Right.
poll. So hey, you know what? Good on them. There's
Yep.
a lot of programs who won national championships that no one remember. Anyway, I'm off my diatribe there. The fact that there was such a good environment there meant a lot. It was something that Dusty, remember, after his first home game as the head coach here, he said, yeah, we'll give him a month and people will come out and they'll pack the place. And like a lot of things, Dusty's, when he says something, it has happened. And fans came out, support was there, people bought in. There was a real belief in what was happening. And it showed with the Maze Rage, with the fans, and it culminated with the Michigan State game. That was, outside of the NCAA tournament games, that might have been the biggest must win because everything was prepared and planned. They were going to celebrate the Big Ten regular season championship after the game. You don't want to do that with Michigan State having more points than you on that given day, even if it's still worthy of a celebration. But for Michigan to win that game, to play as well as they did, and to allow them to listen to it in their visiting locker room on the way out, that was really, really fun.
I got one final question about the team itself. One of the stories that really intrigued me all year long was Elliot Cadeau. I mean, he basically is run out of North Carolina, comes to Michigan, becomes the starting point guard, has a good season, then has that off game against Duke, but then to redeem himself in the tournament run and then becoming the MOP for the tournament. Talk about his career a little bit so far at Michigan.
Yeah, it was one thing, Ted, that I wondered about when all the North Carolina rumors circulated. Not to say that, obviously North Carolina's still a great job and it's a great fan base and all of that. But truly, Elliot Cadeau became a scapegoat for a fan base that demands a lot, that provides a lot, that I have a lot of respect for. But boy, it would have been pretty surprising if in the midst of a national championship potential run at the time, that a coach would be like, yeah, this team that we basically plucked a player from because we believed in him when they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to that program. And again, it's a lot more details to all of this, and a lot more dollars involved than what, little Brian, the broadcaster, can wrap his mind around. But what Elliot did, especially post LJ Kaysen, was so special because he was the one guy. Dusty has said over and over this year that this team had 2 of everything. Well, that was tested when LJ went down because Michigan did not have a true other point guard option.
Mm-hmm.
Trey McKinney helped out. Roddy Gale Jr. helped out. Yax helped out. But Elliot was the guy. And for EC to do what he did, and think about the ebbs and flows of the season. In 5 years, someone's going to bring up the fact, do you remember Elliot Cadeau showed up a day late because of an allergic reaction to a nut allergy?
Right.
And then he went and he won the MOP. That's crazy. And people will forget that. And then someone will remind you, yeah, what an amazing story. That team was great.
Right.
Yeah, how about that? So I really appreciate how he handled things because if you recall, one of the big storylines with him was that he would get into foul trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And it came a little bit in Arizona, but it was the second half. But the first half, I think it ended up being 15 first halves where Elliott had 2 fouls or more. I think in one game he had 3. So for him to be able to absorb all that, to take in good coaching, to develop as a shooter, and I would say there are a lot of big plays he provided. But the one thing everyone's going to talk about the Trey McKinney 3, myself included, but do not forget about the other 3 in that game. It put Michigan up 11. It was 30 minutes into the game.
Right.
And that was as big as any play in that game. And it was something that literally Elliott was instructed not to do at North Carolina. So it's a good show. It's always why I scoffed at the idea that this was a super team, because Michigan had to build it into a super team. This was not a roster people were like, oh, yeah, this is definitely a top 5 roster. This is not, these were not proven talents. This was a point guard who was discarded from North Carolina, an Illinois native who I think the break was pretty good. It was just not a perfect fit with some of the other talent Illinois had. Like I said, I think Brad Underwood does a great job. I have a lot of respect for Illinois. That one's not contentious. The Adai Morrow one, contentious.
Right.
Not from Adai, from other people.
Right.
Adai was the grown up in the room in that situation, and then Yak's obviously superstar. But Michigan had to roll the dice with him. That was not a hey, we know in late April we're getting the best player in the portal. They had to build 2 different futures for themselves, and for them to do it as well as they did and onboard these guys the way that they did was really special. But Elliott was the one he was somewhat forgotten about because everyone was talking about the front court, understandably so. But Michigan won a national championship because of the way Elliott Cadeau raised his game from LJ's injury to the rest of the season, when he was one of the few spots where Michigan just had one of, and he was a really, really good one.
Well, we could go on and on and on, but we don't want to take up all your time. But I do want to, before we sign you out of here, Brian, tell us, you do a lot more than just radio broadcasting. Give us a little bit about your duties and what you got coming up.
Yeah, so the big project we do year in, year out, day in, day out is our podcast feed, MGO Blue Podcast. We'll keep that going pretty much the entire calendar year in the trenches. Our football-specific podcast, we just had one come out this morning, breaking down the spring game, NFL draft preview, all of that. That's John Jansen and me. Conquering Heroes is our kind of athletic department-wide one where we give you some snippets from all programs on campus, try to touch on each program at least once every single season or every single calendar year. And then obviously Defend the Block. Normally I take a break in April, but we're not doing that. The last couple of weeks, it's been really fun sharing some of my reflections. And then just on Tuesday, we put out a submission. A bunch of fans submitted their, reflections, their thoughts on the season. It was really cool to receive a bunch of emails, some audio messages, all that about what the season meant to them. So a fun way to reminisce, because that's what it's all about. And you guys know it. It's about the communities you build through this. It's about the experiences you have, like the fact that you 3 can have this show and talk about many sports, but including Michigan and Michigan basketball. That's what it's about. We're talking about sports, but we're not always talking about sports alone.
Right.
We're building communities, friendships, memories, and man, there aren't many teams that will have more memories than this 2026 Michigan basketball team. And it was a lot of fun. But yeah, we'll keep that going. We'll start getting ready for football season. September 5th will be here before we know it. But I'll oversee our radio affiliates, get some affiliates renewed. I've joked with a few people. It should be easier this year. Coming off the national championship, I can't imagine too much contention or issue, but we got some great radio stations throughout the state. So looking forward to that. But yeah, I'll be taking in some Michigan golf this spring and summer and get a little bit of time away. But as I was telling you guys off the air, when I get to this point, I'm ready for a break. And when we get to, a little past 4th of July, I'm ready to get it rolling again. And that'll be here before we know it, even if I will enjoy the Michigan summer as long as I can.
Well, again,
it's more fun to have a radio show or a podcast when your teams are winning championships, right?
Amen.
Well, I've always joked, people come to us when we win. The numbers weren't great during 8-24, and I can't blame people for that.
Yeah, the one cool thing about that, it was cool to see Juwan. Looks like he has no hard feelings, and that's great. Both sides of the fence there.
Ted, think back to the week he got fired. He was out in L.A. supporting the Michigan women's team in the NCAA tournament. Right. What I would say about Juwan is that the job he took in 2019 versus the job he was relieved of his duties on in 2024, it couldn't have been further apart for someone who remained in the same role. Yeah. I'm glad for a number of reasons this has happened for Michigan, but I think Dusty May has helped preserve the legacy that Juwan Howard deserves. And that's as an all-time player, a guy who led them to 2 Final Fours, and someone who did lead this program to a good, short, but a good run as a head coach, right there to a Final Four. Just couldn't quite get it done against UCLA.
Right.
And then, yeah, the wheels fell off, but, most coaches get fired, and this one obviously tended to work out pretty well. So Dusty preserving his legacy, building it back up to where it deserves to be, one of the many things that I'm thankful for with Coach May and the staff.
All right. Well, good way to end it, Brian. Again, we appreciate the time. And as always, go blue.
All right, fellas, go blue. Thanks for having me.